RC World. My name is Scott Neiman, and I have a lot of questions, and this is one of them. How do you properly take a corner in RC? We see the pros do it. They carry tons of corner speed, and we all want to try to improve. And we have a lot of resources in RC, but this is one that I feel like is overlooked. If you search, you can find all kinds of things about other motorsports, but not necessarily about RC. And so I think this is a discussion we need to have. We know that anybody can go straight in a fast line on the track, but speed is really in the corners. Now, disclaimer, I don't claim to be pro by any means, or even I'm average at best, and I do not claim to know it all, but I just think that this is a conversation that we need to have, and so I'm trying to make my little contribution. So a quick shout out to my local track, PCRC in Missouri. We have an indoor carpet off-road track, and this is where I filmed the video that you'll see in just a minute. We are mostly off-road, but we also do on-road occasionally. And on this particular day when I filmed, all the jumps were gone because we'd been running on-road. So you'll see my 17.5 associated B6.2. And this is the section that we're going to look at. The track we have is actually really big, but my camera can only capture a little bit. And so we're going to look at this double 180 section here. It's coming out of a pretty high-speed sweeper and then into a left-right 180. And then the straight is here, and there's lots of other track over here. And the camera's on the driver's stand. But what I did was I ran all day long. And then at the end of the day, I decided to set my camera up and record a little bit. And I put together all the clips, I tried to begin each one about right here and then through this section and stop the clip right here so that I could compare times. What I was doing throughout the day was moving these cones around. These were my indicators for whether I wanted to take a corner tight or wide or where I wanted to enter that corner. So in this one, I was taking this corner with a tighter approach, and this other one also with a tighter approach. But in the video, you'll see those move around. Now, like I said, I have searched about cornering techniques in RC, and you can't find anything, or at least I never could. But there's plenty from other motorsports. And in fact, when I did find something from or related to RC, they would pretty much just say, yeah, that's about right. So if you search for cornering techniques in other motorsports, and I suggest you do, this is the gist of it. Now, there's two things to consider. One is your line, but also the actual technique of taking the corner. So whether you take a mid or tight entry or a wider entry, that's part of it. But also really the technique of taking the corner itself. So there's really three categories. I've narrowed it down to two. And if you're taking a mid to tight entry, you're going to hit the apex of the corner earlier or in the middle of the corner. And the idea is to brake and to turn in, hit the apex, and roll on the throttle. I should point out, brake doesn't necessarily mean actually hitting the brake. It might just be letting off the throttle. And also, you should never hit full brake unless your wheels are straight. And likewise, when you're coming out of the corner, you shouldn't be full throttle until your wheels are straight. If you take a wider entry and you're going to hit the apex later, when you get on the throttle is slightly different. You're going to hit the brake, you're going to turn in and roll on the throttle before the apex of the turn. Now, when to take a mid or tight entry or when to take a wider entry, that has to do with, whether you're trying to make a pass or what comes before or after the corner. So there's part of the equation, but then the other part is that technique through the corner. And what makes pros is making those decisions about their line selection, but also when and how much brake to use and when and how much throttle to get on. That's what separates them from us. So we're going to see video of me taking that double 180. And this first clip, for example, is going to start with an early apex in the first 180 and then a mid apex in the second one. So you're going to see an early apex on this one and then an apex more in the middle here. And you'll see I have the description down below. I'm just going to roll the tape and then we'll look at it in slow-mo after this. So for this first section, we're looking at the line selection and how that varies through the double 180. Now this ends up being my best time. Consistently, I was able to hit the best time using this strategy here. A mid apex on the first 180 and an earlier apex on the second one. And that makes sense. This line selection is the smart line selection, I believe, because we're coming in with such high speed out of this high-speed sweeper. We wouldn't want to cut this corner too tight coming in for a wide approach because we'd have to scrub off too much speed from the sweeper to do that. And then it also makes sense to take a tighter approach on the second corner because this straight is not quite as long as the other, so we don't come in with as much speed, so we can take an earlier entry into the corner there. All right, now let's look at slow-mo, but this time let's focus on the throttle. Remember, the strategy for an earlier mid-apex is to brake, to turn into the corner, to hit the apex, and then roll on the throttle. So in slow-mo, we can hear the throttle, listen to the throttle, and particularly when I get on. All right, now lastly, I want to look at a wide approach on that first 180, and personally, I'm not as good with a wide approach to a corner. In fact, when I went to the track that day, that was my main goal, was to work on a wide approach, just trying to develop my toolbox, so to speak, of lines that I can take in a corner. So most of the late approaches I took were not very good, but this one was. And the difference being when I get back on throttle. So with a wider approach, we're gonna brake, we're gonna turn in, and then I'm gonna get on the throttle before the apex of the corner. So you'll hear me get back on the throttle about right here. All right, well, that's what I have to offer. I really hope that other people will have videos or other information to contribute as well. I don't claim to be the final authority on this topic, but I do think it's something that we need to discuss in the hobby.